Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Faustine Chan. I'm the Business Innovation Manager for BBB serving the Pacific Southwest. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If you do have to leave this webinar or if you're listen-in caller only, you can retrieve this recording because we are recording the webinar at events.bbbcommunity.org. So it will be posted in 1 day or two after today's webinar. If you do have questions throughout this webinar, please go ahead and type them in the chat option or the Q&A, and we will answer those throughout. We have some great speakers today on our panel. I want to introduce our moderator for today's session, Rebecca Dersh. She is the Public Relations Lead for Cision in Austin, Texas. She has previously worked for agencies such as Connect and Wolf Allens, where she had managed marketing and public relations for a wide variety of clients in industries including nonprofit to tech. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Rebecca.
Great, thank you, Faustine, and a big welcome to everyone who's joined us today. As Faustine mentioned, I'm Rebecca Dersh, and I'm the head of PR here at Cision. Today, we're going to be discussing best practices for brand communications during COVID-19. As you mentioned, please follow the conversation using COVID-19 comms. Again, hashtag COVID-19 comms. If you have any questions during the webinar, again, you can use the chat or the Q&A box, and we will have a live Q&A at the end. And then additionally, we are presenting from our homes today, so we apologize in advance if one of our human or fur children decide to make their presence known on today's presentation. We do have a quick poll that we'd like to go through. Let's see if this, there we go. We just want to get a sense of who's attending today and what industry you're in. So we'll give you a minute there. A lot of nonprofit, service, a lot of others. Great, and I think, hosting other webinars recently around this topic, it's regardless of industry, I think there's a lot of findings and a lot of learnings that you can take from other industries. It's not just your competitors. So thank you again for everyone joining us. It's quite a wide range. So moving forward, just one second. So I'd like to introduce our comms experts for today's webinar. I am joined by John McCartney of Jmac PR and Amelia Folkes of Emerson Automation Solutions. John has 20+ years of experience of leading traditional PR and social media campaigns for technology, advertising, marketing, media, entertainment, health, financial, and cannabis brands. John is a results-driven marketing communications executive with a stellar reputation and work ethic as one of the best PR professionals in the industry. John spent the last 8 years working at Wise PR, an integrated marketing agency, rising from Director of Media Relations in the New York office to West Coast Managing Director between San Francisco and Los Angeles. Amelia has more than 15 years of experience in public relations, supporting a variety of clients in the fields of technology, government, B2B, B2C, financial services, and nonprofit sectors. This experience includes work in crisis communications, stakeholder relations, and brand reputation management. She is a subject matter expertise in corporate social responsibility, thought leadership and corporate communications, multicultural marketing, economic empowerment for minority communities, and service learning as an educational pedagogy. Before we have our speakers share their insight about comms during this crisis, I want to share the best practices that Cision has gathered from key communicators over the past few weeks to help you during this difficult time. So obviously there's a lot going on right now, and these are just some of the best practices. I think first and foremost, stay on brand. Not everyone is going to be a health expert, and we shouldn't be disseminating information if it doesn't feel right for your brand. Leave it to the experts and really stick with what you know and what you're known for. I think additionally, especially on social, we're seeing this. Make sure you don't want to be tone deaf and you don't want to come off as too opportunistic. So it's really important to do your research, see again what your competitors are doing, and also what the other industries are doing, and seeing what's really going to make sense for your brand. But then also, if you're on the end of pitching publications and pitching reporters, you want to make sure you're being appropriate. I think over the past few weeks, we have heard a lot from reporters who are not so happy with some people who have been pitching stories that feel really inappropriate. So because this is all changing so fast, it's really, really important that on a weekly basis, you're monitoring these publications to see what are they actually writing about, how have the reporters shifted their own messaging, are they, solely focused on COVID-19? Are they kind of back to business as usual, which I'm not sure how many people are right now, but I think it's just incredibly important more than ever to just monitor those publications, monitor the reporters to make sure you are actually pitching the right person, you're pitching the right stories, to get a sense of what actually is appropriate. I think it's also incredibly important to over-communicate internally. Obviously, we are all working from home right now, unless you're an essential business. So communicate with your teams. If you don't typically potentially talk to the social team, talk to the social team. Just email marketing. Make sure you're all aligned, because at the end of the day, this should just be one overarching campaign, and you want to ensure that you're getting the appropriate messaging across all of your platforms. Be helpful and provide resources and action items. I think, our team has a daily update. Some people are doing twice a week. I think just making sure you're getting as much as we can this face-to-face communication is crucial. See how you can help your team members, communicate kind of metrics. Again, see what other people are doing in your space and be a resource and be the expert. I think for PR practitioners in particular, you're in the room with leaders that potentially you weren't before. So, communicate, your expertise and be that voice of reason. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. So I think it's important to go with your gut and also vocalize those things. And finally, be human. Obviously, we're all navigating this new norm together. We're all figuring it out. Even from, working with reporters, sometimes it's just reaching out and seeing how you can help them. It's how can you be a resource to them in their stories? It's not necessarily always going to be about pitching the story you want to pitch. Sometimes those things have to go on hold. And as difficult as that can be at times, that's the climate that we're in, and we have to be appropriate and be sensitive. And we don't know what, on a case-by-case basis, what everyone is going through. So just be human and be understanding. This is the time to just be that resource and really build those relationships with people. So now I'm going to pass it off to John, and he's going to share how he's been handling this crisis over the past couple of months. And thank you for joining us, John.
Thank you for having me here, and hello everyone. Greetings from Los Angeles, and hope everyone is staying safe and well during this period. So I am a small business owner. Recently, I decided to create my own PR consultancy. So I, along with a lot of people here on the webinar, we have the same feelings of angst. Like, we have our own businesses and we're like, what are we going to do here from a PR and marketing standpoint? So I think number one, from a PR standpoint, I think it's important to really be mindful of what to pitch and not to pitch. There's a lot of stories that have been written by reporters, and there's a lot of tweets by reporters as well about the number of reporters, people in PR who are pitching stuff that is like really tone deaf, really are just not, are really oblivious to what's going on right now. So number one, when it comes to doing any kind of PR, we all have to ask ourselves, should I be pitching this? To take a really critical look as far as like, this sounds like a nice announcement. I want to, pitch this to a reporter or to the media. Now more than ever, is important for everyone to take a really critical look as far as whether or not things should be pitched or announced. You don't want to send tone-deaf pitches that's going to lead to public shaming. And there are a couple screen graphs that I put in this slide, and there's only bigger in the next slide. But the media, the folks that we work with on a day-to-day basis, they're just like they're humans. So I think we also need to recognize that that the journalists that we're working with, they're under a lot more pressure now than ever before. So if you're in contact and pitching the media, you need to be mindful of that. You know, they are humans, they have feelings, they have a lot of more so pressure now than ever before. So, you know, keep that in mind. And also, above all, have some empathy. I think we talked about this before with Rebecca when she was giving her presentation. But empathy is probably a key takeaway word from this webinar in particular. Empathy, empathy, empathy. We have to have a little bit more empathy to our employees, to our community, and especially to folks in the media. Next slide. So these are some examples of some of the tweets that some of the reporters have put out there, like Josh Sternberg is a reporter from Advertising Age, and somebody's pitching him about Beach Week and Essentials. Like, what are you doing here? And here's another example of a reporter just putting a PR person on blast. And there's a New York Times article here that I want to throw into the chat window, if everyone could take a look here. But, you know, there's another example of some of the folks in PR, not everyone in PR is not following best practice, but there's some very small handful. Oh, thanks, Rebecca, for sharing that out. But it's just, again, just being mindful of the media and the journalists that you're looking to reach out to, and just really taking that critical look, like, should I be pitching this? Is it going to appear as tone deaf? Next slide. And then I created here sort of a PR and marketing checklist. You know, PR is all about, we're storytellers. You know, we're here to work with reporters and journalists on some new, creative, exciting stories, narratives that they want to work on. So there's some industries that are able to sort of be able to pitch reporters and media that's not going to appear tone deaf. For example, I have a health tech startup who recently created their own at-home COVID-19 test. That's timely, and as a company that has been creating their own at-home tests before. So this is a new product that they wanted to come up with, and they are putting out into the market. So that's something that wasn't tone deaf, that I was able to, in a very empathetic way, do my research and pinpoint which reporters would be interested in hearing this product. I have another client who is, they created like these travel leisure apparel, and they recently stopped producing that apparel line and just started creating more en masse because they wanted to meet the challenge. That is also another sort of thing that's not tone deaf. So there are some things there that you just have to just take a look to see, like, what are the narratives that's going to contribute to the overall online conversation. And then I think, you know, you also have to take a look as a brand, as a business, to see, like, okay, what other content can we as a business create that's going to be relevant to our audience? You know, I think it's, you know, you just have to take a look at the industry that you're in and see, like, how do, you know, what pieces of content can we create that's going to not come off as self-serving, but provide value to this overall conversation. I think business also have to look at their social media profiles and just be a little bit more engaged with customers. I actually had my local sushi restaurant this afternoon. I followed them on Instagram, and I was there back in early February and took a photo there, and they somehow this afternoon on their Instagram feed posted on their Instagram story, say, "Hey, we miss you." And I was like, "Oh, that's really nice." And I'm going to probably order some sushi from them. It's been a while, but stuff like that, just to be a little bit more engaged with the customers, is going to go a long way. I think businesses also and brands should continue to join these webinars to read and see what other businesses are doing when it comes to marketing. Maybe there are some ideas, advice that you can take away that you can apply to your own businesses. And I think long-term, we all have to start looking down the road. Yes, there's a lot of stuff happening right now in the immediate term, but I think if we're going to be optimistic here, I think we should really start looking at Q3 and Q4 as far as, okay, what can we do down the road? A friend told me, like, yes, we're going through this crisis, but look, Christmas will not be canceled. Thanksgiving won't be canceled. So, I think if we're able to really look ahead, start thinking of some things you may want to do from a marketing and PR standpoint down the road.
What do you think that was great? Thank you. What do you think what are some of those things what can we do right now, whether you're communicating with clients or just internally with your teams? What are some steps, because we don't really know when this is going to end, and obviously the effects are going to be long lasting. Yep. What are some steps people can take right now to feel prepared and be prepared?
Yeah, I mean, I think, what I've been telling my clients, a couple things. One, to what I've sort of outlined in these couple slides, but there's some reporters that some of my clients are media friendlies with. So, and we have built in that relationship to say, hey, just reaching out, just checking with you, reporter, hope you're safe and well. I see some of the stories you've been covering. How, is there anything else that is on your plate that, maybe my brand can help you as far as being a source or getting someone else to speak with you within my network. Again, it's about just, being a little bit more considerate, more thoughtful, a little bit more empathetic as far as, how can I help you, member of the media, with whatever you're working on, but also, from the human element to be able to check in with you to say, hey, I hope you're safe and well, is there anything that we can do to help you with your day-to-day work? So I think from a PR standpoint, that's some of those things that we can look at, and also just, reading and seeing like what are these other businesses, like-minded businesses are doing when it comes to PR. You all have your go-to websites that you check out for news, or TV stations. Just sort of, just check and see like, okay, what are some of the things that these other businesses are doing? That might be also an opportunity, if you will, to sort of reach out to them, say, hey, I'm a small business owner. I saw you in this piece with this reporter. Can you tell me a little bit about what you are working on? Because, again, it's the community aspect. We have to support one another during this difficult time. So I think that's going to go a long way. But I think also, aside from PR, but I think we look from social media. I think this is really a great opportunity for business to really look at their digital profiles and see how they can grow it and scale it. I think social presents a better opportunity to really control the aspects of that ongoing engagement and that dialogue with your customers, versus, working with a reporter. It's not really guaranteed whether or not they want to do a story, but at the very least, you can control the engagement aspect with your customers. Like, for example, the sushi restaurant that I mentioned, didn't even expect that I would get this. It was a pleasant surprise, but stuff like that will enable me to say, hey, that's a very thoughtful business doing that nice thing. I'm going to, go ahead and, put an order in, like this afternoon or this weekend. So I think in the immediate standpoint, that's some of the stuff that businesses should look at from a PR and social standpoint.
Yeah, and if I could answer, Rebecca, I think John mentioned it right at the very beginning, especially since I saw in the poll that we have some nonprofits. And I think this can happen for both nonprofits and, for-profit businesses. But I'm also a member of PRSA Austin. And here in Austin, we decided as a leadership team to reach out to our like-minded nonprofits. There's like 2 or 3. We all kind of offer very similar. There's a marketing organization, there's a freelance organization for communicators, and we're all setting up a call to talk about what does the future hold. What is our funding going to look like? Because we're membership based. And how do we not necessarily compete, but learn from each other and support each other in a future that is so, unclear. And so I would highly recommend, if you're a nonprofit, reach out to your local organizations in your community, or those that are offering similar but yet different support services, and see how you can collaborate, or at least talk about the future. I think people want to receive and still help, but they also don't want to be bombarded with online fundraisers or something to that effect, if that's an example. So how can organizations work together to meet each other's goals while still keeping their membership engaged and active? So, and I think you can do the same thing on a small or for-profit business, but I think it's especially true in the nonprofit space.
That's great, thank you. And I think there is something around, obviously, being in PR, you have to already be prepared for a crisis. Obviously, none of us quite anticipated this, but now that we know what's going on, to really have those tools of, depending on what organization you're at and what type of space you're in, what can you anticipate could potentially happen during this crisis, and just having a plan in place and having communication in place if that does happen. So thank you, that was great. So hi, Amelia. Thank you for joining us today. I'm curious to hear what practices, you've been implementing during this difficult time.
Yeah, and I'll just, give a caveat. I'm going to kind of pull from various aspects of my experience, because I'm currently in a global, large corporation, and I think most of our folks that are on this call are small businesses. So I have worked with small businesses. We run a lot like a small business because we're a matrixed organization with lots of businesses within the corporation. So I'm hoping that these examples are still valid to you, but I'm looking forward to the Q&A. So one of the things is, how do you stay relevant? I mean, if you're a service organization, a construction company, and you've been told you can't, you can only do, if you're a home builder, you can only do so many houses, or you can only have so many construction workers at a site. How do you stay relevant? How do you stay top of mind? John's example of that sushi restaurant, he had kind of forgotten about them. So what do you do to stay relevant? So one of the things is that this is a new normal for all sizes of companies. So you can take an example of a large brand and apply it to yourself, even if you're not. So I think saying, oh, well, we can't do that, we don't have the resources, that's actually usually not true. I think being smaller makes you more nimble. So how are you adjusting to meet your customers' needs? Are you communicating with your customers? How are you telling your customers what's to be expected? My daughter's in a gymnastics class, and I get an email from that team every week. They're telling us what they're doing. They're asking for support. They have different variations. It's a small business. And as a user of that small business, I really appreciate understanding what my role is as their customer. So are you communicating to your customer? And that can be via social media, as John suggested. It could be direct letters. It could be on your website. And I'm going to show an example that we've used on our website. If you are a company that has vendors and suppliers, and without those vendors and suppliers, you can't function. And now with the social distancing orders, lots of mail issues, those kinds of things, your supply chain has probably changed. So how are you ensuring that your vendors and your supply chain understands what you're doing to modify your business? Are you switching your manufacturing? Are you switching how you provide service to a customer? Are you taking your services online? Can they depend on you for an order, or can you depend on them for their supply? So how are you communicating and engaging with them so that you will be relevant to them now and afterwards? And that's really important. Being flexible. I think at the end of the day, change is constant. We've all probably heard that even before COVID-19. Well, that is so true now. And just being able to say what we're doing today may not hold true tomorrow, or may not hold true in Q3 or Q4, and understanding that, and then helping your employees understand that change. That's so important. And being flexible to adjust. Something that worked this week because of a government regulation about usage of masks may not work next week. So how are you adjusting? And then communicate that to your employees, to your customers. And we'll talk about channels on how to communicate those things. And then the last thing that I think it's so important is to share your story. I have as a consumer, I have read on all types of social medias, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, even on TikTok. I have teenagers. So what is your story? What are you doing? I've seen companies move all their, like retail, move all their shopping online, e-commerce. We have a local boutique here, right here where I live in Pflugerville, Texas, who is taking all orders online, and then personally, she, the owner, is delivering them at the door. That's a huge commitment, but it's keeping her running. And then she always posts on Instagram, thank you, please share what you purchased. And so there's a lot of that back and forth communication. And that's amazing. It's telling her story. It's making me empathize with her and her business, and it's even engaging me to purchase. So what is the story? Now, if you had to shift your business, as John said, some of his clients are now, producing devices. I know that our company actually shifted manufacturing to help the medical device industry. So, but we want to tell people, and it's not just media. You want to tell your consumer, you want to tell your customers, you want to tell your supply chain. Those are really important. The media wants to hear those stories. And I'll talk a little bit about the types of media in the next slide. So I think what's really important is also knowing what are the many channels that you can communicate with. Some of you may say, I don't know how to pitch the media, or I don't even know who I would pitch. Like, do I call the local TV station? Do I reach out to my local newspaper? Or I don't have the bandwidth. We're in the middle of cooking every day to make sure we can get out online orders, or checking our e-commerce site to make sure we are delivering on time, or whatever it is that you're doing. That's totally understandable, but you can dedicate some time on your own channels, your website, your Facebook page. If you have a blog, your blog. LinkedIn, for certain B2B companies, LinkedIn is an excellent location for telling your story, engaging, and LinkedIn allows you to use hashtags. There are groups and trade associations within LinkedIn that you can communicate in a like-minded setting. You can also use LinkedIn to determine your spokesperson and have them have a voice. Let's say it's you, the owner, or maybe it's someone else that's associated with your brand. Have their LinkedIn profile include an image. They can do a long form post. That's what we call when people can follow what you're writing about, and it's not just a post that you see on a feed. Those are great avenues, and you own them, and they don't cost you anything other than time. And that's always good, right? In this time of, shrinked budgets and sales. So determine who your voice is. I mentioned the spokesperson. Who do you want to be that face when you do reach out to media? Who's the person that's going to be good on camera, that is going to be able to talk about the message, have empathy, be human on screen? That's really important to understand and know in advance. Don't wait till the reporter calls you and say, oh no, who can do this? So be prepared, practice, write it out. What are you going to say? What is your story? What is your message? And then read it out loud. So going back to like old school tactics, right? So, and then consider all types of media. A lot of people are worried about their story not being relevant. John talked a lot about getting out to a reporter and it just being so unrelated to what's going on. And reporters are not interested unless it's a COVID story. That's not always true if you have a very dedicated trade side of the business. So I know at Emerson, we depend on trade media. We communicate to a ton of trade media that depends on us for stories to develop, to actually print magazines. Manufacturing has a huge load of trade magazines in all different industries. And so maybe there's media if you're a real estate agent or a construction company or home builders. I know there are magazines, trade associations that are still interested in the story. They still also have to tell the story about the economy and the business. So it's not always going to be your local news outlet or a large national news outlet. It could be a unique trade association that has a newsletter that communicates to your customers. It could even be a freelance journalist that is looking for stories to have to write for the various media outlets that are not like MSN or CNN or Fox. They may be freelancing for things like Now This or BuzzFeed, and maybe not the most basic of everyday media, but they hire freelancers. That's how those media companies stay open. So reach out, find them on Twitter and follow them. Even influencers. It may be a local micro influencer, someone who I think I muted myself. Sorry about that. I don't know what part I left off, but so even influencers can be, and they can be inexpensive local influencers. I think some, local celebrities or local people who like to talk about food have done a great job of promoting restaurants free of charge just through their social media, and their social media can garner so much attention. So think outside the box, definitely. And then work with your customers to amplify your story. John just mentioned that wonderful sushi restaurant. Now he's thinking about it, but don't be afraid to ask and say, hey, once you buy the sushi, I'd love to hear what you thought. And for him to post it on his social media. Ask people to tell your story. Maybe if you're a big supplier, the company you're supplying, you could say, I would love to work with you to reach out to this local media outlet and talk about how we've shifted our business together. So that helps a lot to tell the story when others can tell it for you. And then as John had mentioned, and then of course, Rebecca from Cision, there are tons of local organizations offering free or very low cost services, resources online. The Small Business Administration, BBB, of course, use those resources, either watch a recording of a webinar, check online, and we as a group here, we can share a few others that we know of. I know that if you are in communications, there are organizations like PRSA in every community locally. John and I are both former presidents of our local chapters. There's AMA for those in the marketing, or IABC, or women communicators, tech groups. There are just a slew of organizations. You think about it, and there's a trade organization or a communications organization that's helping others to do to do a good job. And then I just wanted to leave with some examples of what we're doing here at Emerson. If you could go to the next slide, Rebecca. So I talked a lot about your own channels and telling a story where you can control that story. This is an example of, we launched a COVID page on our website, and it has our CEO's letter to everybody. That's something you can do. Have a page dedicated, if it's your home page or a new page. We've been featured in a couple articles, so you can link to those articles. You can link to a LinkedIn post. The second thing on there of the guy holding the helmet, that's actually our president, who wrote a post on LinkedIn about the importance of essential workers in the manufacturing industry and supporting those. We're linked to that. So you're amplifying your own story in many ways. So that's just something easy to do. And then the next slide. For those of you who are large enough, it's really important to stick with consistent and cohesive messages. That is something, as all communicators, we always say, make sure you know your story and you're all telling the same story. And so for those of you who can, or who have an intranet, even if it's a whiteboard at your office or at your home office, make sure everybody knows where to go to get the memo, where to go to use the social post. What graphic are we using? What is the hashtag that we're going to use? I mean, it'd be horrible if you had 3 people at your company using 3 different hashtags for your company. So create kind of a laundry list of things that everybody can use, that is approved, that's kind of run through the, the circles of, do we like the way this positions us? Yes, let's have everybody use it. The memo that we sent to our customers that you can reference. So that's really important. Make it easy for your team to be able to do the job that you need them to do, but as well as to help you do the job of communicating what your story is. And that's all I have.
That was great. Thank you so much. Really, really helpful stuff. What do you say to people who feel like, it's been over a month now, my organization doesn't have anything new to say about COVID-19, or it doesn't make sense for us? How much right now should, it be part of their messaging? I think a lot of folks are struggling with, obviously we're in this moment of fatigue, but it's obviously incredibly relevant still. So how much should it be part of their messaging?
Yeah, I think it depends on the organization. We're in that same boat, actually, where it's like, have we talked about it too much? Are we sounding like we're tooting our own horn? And I think you have to, those decisions sometimes are when you're, each time you have that opportunity. I think if it's important for you to just survive, then maybe it's take some time to talk to your employees and encourage your employees to, you know, meet the needs that they need to meet their needs, and then revisit in 2 weeks.
Yeah, and to follow up on what Amelia said, I think you know, there are industries that who are able to contribute to the overall conversation. You know, they should pivot to see, you know, if there's anything there from their business standpoint that they can offer up, you know, for PR. But you know, unfortunately, there are some industries that really don't have a connection. So I think it's incumbent upon the team at the business to sort of come up with some, you know, out of the box creative ways of trying to find some PR pitches that could work. But I think you know, past that, I mean, PR is not the end all be all marketing channel. I mean, there's social media, there's email newsletters. I think in the interim, I think those channels will have a better sort of immediate result as far as making sure that the marketing of the business is out there and being visible and being vocal. But I think tied to that, businesses really need to reset their outbound messaging to really make it more empathetic, that it's not tone deaf, and that it does speak to, you know, their employees, their customers, and to the community.
Wonderful, thank you. And just a reminder for everyone, we have some questions in here, but we have the Q&A box, the chat box, and then you can also raise your hand with a question, and then it's hashtag COVID-19 comms. You can reach out to us there as well right now. A few questions we have coming in. There's one, John, that you answered. I do want to bring it up again because I think it's really helpful to have these kind of real world examples. So, you know, what brands do you think have pivoted their messaging and are navigating the crisis really well?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think the two brands that I thought of were Marriott and Danny Meyer, who's a restaurateur. You know, so they both came out they both came out with statements that really was sort of well received from a tone standpoint because it was very raw, it was very real, it was very empathetic. And I think when you hit on all those points and you come at it from look, I'm just being real, being honest, this is the reality, I think that goes a long way. So they had to pivot, and I think you know, other companies have followed suit for the most part. So I think going back to you know, what I mentioned before, I think, you know, there's some industries that may not be able to find a way to think outside the box or find something that they can add value to the overall conversation. But then when that happens, I think you have to look at like other channels like social media and email to really make sure that the communication with your customers and potential customers are still ongoing.
Definitely. Few more questions here. What are some ways to merge the occasional disconnect between internal and external comms? I think from my perspective, monitoring social is huge there. I think see what people are saying. You see when users are not happy, when people are not happy with a brand, you can find that on social. So I think it's really important to just monitor, again, your competitors, their audiences, like what are people saying? And then providing that information to your own teams and showcasing, you know, this is what's working and this is what isn't. I don't know if you have any other insight into that.
Yeah, I mean, I would jump in because I think internal comms is, you know, such an important aspect during a crisis that sometimes gets forgotten. It's so important, and I will admit that even in an organization as mature as ours, we we kind of stumbled at the gate because it was, you know, crisis mode, right? And we realize we're, you know, realizing now and how important it is that our own employees know how much we're doing and are communicated at different levels, whether it's the CEO or your supervisor, about how appreciative we all are for their work. So my company is considered an essential employer. So we still have people at manufacturing facilities. We still have people coming into the office, and it's so important to help them understand how much we appreciate what they're doing. And I think sometimes what we're doing externally, we don't realize that we should share that internally. And so that website that I showed that had like the resources, that's an intranet site. What I didn't show is that there's a whole nother section of internal comms that tells people like the list of memos that have come out, the internal websites with information, the promotions of some of the great, like the rah-rahs of our own team, of people getting together and donating products to the hospital. And we realized how important it was to keep everybody, you know, kind of going and feeling good about what they're doing, especially when you're considered essential. So I think that's really important. It's to ensure that what you're doing externally, you're also looking back and saying, how can we help our employees understand what we're dealing with? So I even talked about sending letters to your customers about what's going on with your supply chain, or what are you doing to change your demand, or how your business is changing. Well, you want to make sure to tell your employees that too. Not everybody may know. And so just about anything you communicate externally should be internal as well, and sometimes first, right? So I always tell my executives, you know, your best ambassadors are your employees. They have if they're employed there, they're obviously passionate about what they do. They love the business. And so they're going to talk about it. I think you look at companies here in Texas like H-E-B, which is a grocer. They have done an amazing job to not only meet the demand, and I think lots of grocers have, but they've really gotten some highlight because their employees are passionate about their brand. And they have really come out and talked about, oh, my employer is doing this. My employer did this. They care about us this way. And I know that if you happen to see someone walking around with an H-E-B t-shirt logo, they're like, oh, thank you so much for all you do. People are really appreciative. So I think, you know, employees are a great brand ambassador. And so make sure you take care of them and you communicate just as much with them as you do with your customers.
I love that. Definitely. Thank you. We have a question here about metrics. Historically, publicists have reported metrics like advertising value equivalency and unique monthly visitors. What are the metrics that we should be reporting to prove PR's value, especially during a time like this when publicists might be earning less coverage than usual? What's important right now?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm a bit of a data nerd. I love numbers. I love data. I love reporting. I love measurement. When I broke into the industry, you know, many years ago, it was all about sort of impressions, and then it was about ad equivalency. But as the years went on, many folks that I spoke with started to not buy into ad equivalency or even impressions, because, you know, we don't even know like how the impressions formula came up with. Was it 1 times 1.5? Is it times 3? Is it times 10? It's like, there is no, you know, where do you go back, you know, and sort of figure out what is the right formula. So I and my teams have started to, in years ago, not focus on impressions. I think we looked at like, we look at a website's authority. So for example, they're uniques. We look at also how many followers they have on Twitter or on Facebook. You know, I think when you look at that holistically, that gives you a better sense of the outlet's authority. So that's one of the things that we would look at as far as like, okay, who are the outlets that we're getting some coverage in? Because I think that's what clients want. But at the end of the day, the client says, okay, we want PR for awareness, but at the end of the day, it's about converting them into customers. So, and we like to tell, well, my teams, we like to say, look, clients, we'll get you the awareness, but PR is not the end all be all. There are other factors in marketing that you need to also look at.
Yeah, and I would add to what John said with, we look at share of voice, which is, basically what he was saying. It's so important it could be a small outlet or it could be a large outlet. And it's not so much the clicks or the impressions, but how is your share of voice compared to others, to your competitors? What is the authority of that outlet? And then of social media engagement. So it's not just likes, which are good, but are people writing back? Are they sharing what you posted? Is there a story that's then being shared online and amplified? That's great. Are people reading what you want them to read? So there is definitely a move away in the PR practice, away from AVEs or impressions into more valuable metrics. And so if you have an executive that doesn't understand that, that's where Cision is so good at. They can they can show you, these are the terms that are getting really good coverage. This is the share of voice that certain companies may have during this time frame. And they can help. That's really important, is to explain that to your executive, because sometimes an ad, even a paid ad with a great magazine or a newspaper for those communities that still have them, may not even get seen, but they may say, oh, but we have a subscription of 10,000 people. Well, that's not really great. How many people clipped the coupon and actually came and used it? So, definitely be thinking about how it changes, how it's converting. Your reputation is then converted to sales.
Definitely. And I think there's also something around, maybe you are earning less coverage, but maybe you got a piece of, earned media that's driving, a great deal amount of website traffic. So focus on that. Focus on, look, the number of mentions might be down, but look at all the traffic that we're actually driving to this page on our site. So it's just providing also, as you mentioned, that context.
And also, if I can just add to that, Rebecca, you just reminded me of another important metric that brands should also look at. It's referral traffic. Look at your Google Analytics. If you haven't set it up, do so. You can then see from a PR marketing standpoint where the referrals are coming from. You get a story in like whatever outlet, it could be like the Dallas Morning News, and they include a link to your website. And then you're seeing like, wow, we got a spike in traffic because of the Dallas Morning News. Then you can make the connection, like, if it wasn't for the PR team, we would have gotten that sort of click through. So that's something else to keep in mind.
Definitely. And it really helps you with your strategy and to prioritize. I mean, even just from my end, publications that maybe in the past I wouldn't have been as excited about, I see that those drive sometimes the most traffic to our site when I typically wouldn't have even known that. So now I know to focus on those publications. So, by looking at those analytics, you're also not wasting your time on the wrong publications, and you can see what's actually working and what's not, and where your audience is really engaging. So thank you. I think there are some questions too about just working with reporters. So someone said, what does pitching look like for brands who are not able to pivot? There was a recent New York Times article that bashed, I think, to your point, John, I think some publicists are getting a really hard time right now if they're not like reading the room. What do you say about, what's appropriate and what's not? I think it does go back to just monitoring those reporters and monitoring, those publications. But, if there is a brand that feels like they can't pivot, what do you recommend? And should everyone?
I think, when I see those stories like that New York Times story, I think, I immediately, it wasn't that account executive's fault. I think that it comes from like bad leadership. I think, I get brands need to just make sure that they're pitching, but it's like you're wasting your time. You're just pitching reporters because it's not going to go anywhere, and you got to be smarter than that. And you got to do your homework and get back to foundations. Like, before I send this pitch to this reporter, let me see what this reporter has been covering of late. You need that intel, you need that data, that research. And unfortunately, if a brand says, well, we can't pivot, then I think that's just the easy way out. I'm sure there is a way to pivot. You just have to really think about the different ways. Maybe there's something there with like your customers that you can tap into as, you know, to be your brand ambassadors. Maybe it's your business partners. Maybe they can speak on your behalf. There's got to be some kind of narrative there versus like, oh, I'm just going to throw my hands up and say, you know, we can't pivot. You know, there are other ways to sort of look at of solving the puzzle.
Yeah, and I have like personal examples where just in our community, so many small businesses have pivoted, whether it's e-commerce or delivering, you know, in person, or creating, you know, a more virtual classroom set. I mean, look at school districts across the country. They've all had to pivot. Now, I'm sure they all wanted to put their heads in the sand and say, nope, we're done for the year. It is possible. I agree with John. It is absolutely possible. Now, whether or not you can do so with the infrastructure that you have, it's a determination that you have to decide as a business owner and have to decide what's more valuable. And I know that restaurateurs have really gotten creative. Some have had a skeleton crew, but still kept as many people on the payroll as possible. I saw an article, I think it was here in the Texas Standard, where a local restaurant couldn't afford to keep everybody on the payrolls, and they had a really high level or high brand like whiskey bar or something. So they decided to auction off some of their best whiskey, and like $10,000 worth of whiskey. And they actually went above and beyond. They got a $40,000 price tag for someone who wanted not just to buy the whiskey, but wanted to help the restaurant. And so creative ways. We were talking in a staff meeting earlier with my team about, you know, people are buying wine and drinking. Yes, the supply chain to restaurants has dried up completely, but people are still buying, ordering online, and having virtual happy hours. So how can you participate in that? What is it that you do as a business that helps? Are you providing any kind of construction materials? There's a ton of people working on house projects right now. Home Depot is, you know, or Lowe's are out of certain stock. How can your construction company or your service company help? Is there something that you can do that still allows for social distancing? Deliver and then put in the front yard. So really being creative. I think, you know, creative innovation and creativity are at its highest here. I mean, look at how many businesses, and I know some stay-at-home families that are making masks just to help. So things like that, I think every business can. And it's just, what is that story that you want to tell about your business, and how can you handle it?
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
This definitely brought up some creativity that I think people didn't necessarily expect. No one obviously saw that we'd be in this situation. There's a question around, what do you think the message should be when we come out of COVID-19? Businesses are obviously anxious to open because of revenue, but what should the message be?
So, I mean, I think we're all kind of wondering what that message will be when we come out. I think it's about resiliency and survival. How, as a business, you pivoted, you told your story, you stayed committed to your employees. I think and I've seen it on social media, the brands that are firing people, or, you know, there was a company right here in Texas that was going to deduct employees' pay for for our checks that are the stimulus check, you know, in the equal amount of the stimulus check. Well, I'm sure they're not going to get a lot of customers after COVID disappears, or even now. So believe it or not, what you do as a business owner right now will impact your brand reputation for months to come. So when we're on the flip side, that's going to be really important. So when you're making really big business decisions now, you have to think in the long term how it's going to impact you later. Your reputation, did you take care of your employees? Did you do your best to pivot? Are you know, what were you doing as a business to either survive or help with the cause? So I think those are the kinds of things that you need to be thinking about when you're making decisions now. So that goes to what John was talking about, thinking about Q3 and Q4. People are still going to celebrate the holidays. I think Easter turned out to be an amazing holiday for those who celebrate, or Passover. people were really excited, about what they could do. Our local city did delivery of all the eggs that they were going to do anyways, right? You just paid $5 and they brought them to your house, and then you did your egg hunt at home. So I think people will remember that, and it'll have a lasting effect. And so that's why you have to plan now for what's going to happen in 3 months.
Yep, and to follow up on that, Amelia, I think what I would add is like relationships. I think as part of the pivoting, I think one of the key takeaways that I see after COVID is over is are the relationships between businesses and their customers. I think businesses will come and go, but the ones who really went out of their way to engage with their customers, that's going to have a long lasting effect. Like, I go back to the sushi restaurant. Like, I mean, that might be the only business that I know that really reached out to me on social. I'm like, okay, your business, I hope your business doesn't go away, but if it does, I'm going to follow you and where you guys go, because you have a customer for life.
Definitely. I think we have time for one more question. Someone asked, would you recommend moving towards coverage of the positive things going on? I know I can say next week, actually, Cision is publishing our annual State of the Media report, and we have a special COVID-19 section, and reporters are asking for that. They're saying, we want these positive stories. We want encouraging and inspiring stories that we can share with people, because there's this fatigue, and it's, there's a lot going on right now, so we want to hear those stories. And any final thoughts from you guys? This was so great.
Yeah, and I'll just echo what you said, Rebecca. I think positive stories, John Krasinski literally started an online like news network, Some Good News or something. Yeah, Some Good News. He's doing it from his house, and the way he's getting his stories is people are sending him from social media. It's like your average person, not any major brand. Hospitals, nurses, they're saying, hey, this is what our community did. This is what we did. Absolutely. I think if you have a positive story, and maybe the story isn't about your business or your brand, but it's about your owner or your employee or someone who's struggling, or maybe you have an employee who has COVID and the rest of your employees have, come together to help that employee's family or has recovered. The stories are endless, but I absolutely think that the media, especially local media, will be very interested in those positive stories.
Yeah, I agree, Amelia. I think we're going through this sort of resetting. I think, I think before COVID, it was a lot of clickbaits. It was like, oh, this and that. But now, I know for me, I can't even watch the news, during the day, because it's just, as an investor, I'm like, oh, let's play the numbers game. The price is right. The stock is up 300 points. Oh, it's down. I don't want to go through that every day. So I do like John Krasinski's Some Good News. I like hearing more good news. I think that's something else that's hopefully going to continue once COVID is over, that we're going to see more good news.
Definitely. Well, thank you both. I just want to also quickly say, if you want to hear from Cision more as well, you can raise your hand in Zoom. It looks like our time is up already. I want to thank our speakers again for taking time out of their very busy schedules to join us. Thank you, everyone, today. Really, again, appreciate you joining us, and I'm going to pass it off to Faustine for closing comments.
Yes, thank you again to both of our speakers, Amelia and John, and also thank you to our moderator, Rebecca, for moderating this session. Really appreciate all your thoughts and comments and your expertise as well. So once again, this webinar is recorded, so it will be available on events.bbcommunity.org. We will also send a follow-up email to everyone in attendance just to include additional information about Cision if you're interested, and links to their website as well. But thank you everyone for attending. Please take care and be safe out there.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.